seen the American Experience film where C.T. Vivian is interviewed, and when they asked him whether he had syphilis or not, and he responded not in a way that they didn't like it, and so the guards hit him, and he started bleeding. And he says in the film, of course, they weren't supposed to do that. They were supposed to bruise, not to bleed. But of course, that was only because there was coverage. The media was looking over their shoulder. Finally, obviously, as we know, people had been brutalized and murdered in Parchman for generations, but they had to use other tactics. They had to take their mattresses, they had to take their toothbrushes, they had to put salt in the food and all the other things, annoyances, put people in solitary in the box, but not the traditional methods of intimidation. I think a lot of that has to do with the media presence that comes in and changes everything. The other, of course, is the intrusion of the federal government. I mean, one of the things that Senator James O. Eastland has been able to do is to eventually keep the federal government out of Mississippi. There was really almost no chance that the federal government would do the kinds of things they do later, in terms of John Doerr coming down and trying to protect, at least to some degree, the lives of people doing voter registration and other things. So that I think those are two things that change things fundamentally with freedom rides. And of course, here we are 50 years later, and we've been talking about how Mississippi has changed, and certainly the rides create a long process that we're still in the middle of. But I think one thing that's important to remember is that for about a year and a half, the rides actually made things worse in Mississippi, not better. I mean, the short-term impact is a tremendous amount of repression and violence. We see that, of course, in the Battle of Oxford, where James Meredith tries to register in September of 1962. But all over, you know, when the voter education projects come in, places like Cleveland, Clarksdale, and Macomb, and other places, there's savage reaction and repression. So the fears that Medgar Evers had were not totally unfounded. Sometimes you have to take 2 steps back before you take 3 steps forward, and that's really, or maybe 4 steps back in this case. It was, those of you who were here, I'm sure remember what a brutal time it was. 1962 was not a happy year for black people in Mississippi. And Mississippi was the one, well, along with a few towns in Louisiana, was the one place that for at least a year essentially ignored the ICC ruling. Almost everywhere else the signs came down in Mississippi, but the Justice Department had to file a number of lawsuits in places like Grenada and many other communities to try to get to abide by the new ruling. So it was, in some ways, Mississippi paid the price. So the signs came down in Georgia and Alabama and Virginia and North Carolina, and there was real change in that first year. But if you stop time, let's say in November of 1962, and you were an African American in Mississippi, you probably might have said that freedom rides weren't worth it. It didn't look like it. It looked like it made things worse, not better. But amazingly, as we move into 1963, Eisenhower once said you can't legislate morality, but of course, as we know, you can legislate behavior. And once the behavior begins to change, sometimes the attitudes, the deeper realities of people's hearts and minds begin to change. And that seems to happen in 1963, even before Freedom Summer. And again, it's a long, slow process. So ultimately, obviously, the fact that not only do the freedom rides sort of crack the mystique of Jim Crow. Again, I'm sure many of you remember, there was a kind of, just as that story I was telling about, God would only go as far as Memphis. Well, the movement only went as far as Memphis, the national movement. Prior to the Freedom Rides, there was a sense that, you'd have to be out of your mind to really attack Jim Crow Mississippi frontally in those early years, which is what made what Bob Moses and others did in Macomb so amazing. They deliberately went to the toughest towns in the United States, sort of like the Project C, the confrontation strategy in Birmingham in '63. Again, they were trying to really nationalize the movement and sort of crack this mystique that somehow you couldn't go into the small towns of Alabama and Mississippi. And the fact that the Freedom Riders hang around, enough of them, Bernard Lafayette, Diane Nash, and Jim Bevel, and lots of others, of course, confirms the worst fears of the white supremacists in Mississippi, that we're never going to get rid of these people. In fact, Joe Patterson, the Attorney General of Mississippi, makes a statement in '61. He says, we're in for some bad years here. These outside agitators are never going to go away. And by God, they didn't. But I think it's important to remember that there's some really tough times, and the fact that so many local Mississippians, black Mississippians, for the most part, had the courage to keep fighting despite the incredible repression. We owe them such an incredible debt, and I think that's really one of the reasons why it's so important to be here 50 years later, to thank them for the amazing courage. And I'm sure many of you know the story, but when Freedom Summer comes in '64, and all the so-called rights revolution that transforms America later in the '60s with the anti-war movement and students' rights and the women's movement and environmental, all the things that happened. One of the key episodes is the free speech movement in Berkeley. It starts in '64. Well, the person who was really at the center of that is Mario Savio, who came here during Freedom Summer and really as a follow-up of Freedom Rides. And he goes back to Berkeley, and he was so struck by the courage of black Mississippians that he goes back and he harangues the people in Berkeley, essentially, and saying, my God, these people can do this against incredible odds. Maybe we can start to stand up for ourselves here. And I don't think we would have seen the movement in Berkeley, in the way that we did without the inspiration of Mississippi. So it's the rides, although they, again, built on the foundation of a local movement, it's one of those incredible transformative moments in American history that I think we're only now beginning to appreciate. That what happened here in Mississippi in 1961 not only transformed the civil rights movement, but it transformed American democracy. And the whole redefinition of what it means to be an American citizen happened. So, anyway, again, it's great to be here, and look forward to your discussion and questions. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Olita Garrett Fitzgerald, and I am, in fact, one of Hollis's kids. I'll also bring you greetings from my boss. I'm the regional director for the Children's Defense Fund. And Marion Wright Engelman very much wanted to be in Mississippi during this time. She keeps calling and saying, when is the bus departure? And I told her it was tomorrow and that I would be participating, and she was trying to see how could she get down here. But at any rate, the movement continues through the work that we do and the work that a lot of people do in this state and beyond. Hollis calls me his child because in 1966 I came to Tougaloo College. Madison County is now one of the most prosperous counties in the state of Mississippi. It's one of the fastest growing counties, the highest income county, and it's majority white. In 1975, Madison County was 75% black and black landowners. I grew up on Highway 16, halfway between Canton and Carthage. That's the way we tell people how to get to our house. Carthage is not far from Philadelphia. But I grew up with a family that was a very active family, if not overtly so. My father was very overtly active. My mother taught school, and the way she handled things was quite different. I'm one of 8 siblings, and we knew 2 things growing up that I don't remember anybody telling us. One was that we couldn't tell anybody that my mother belonged to the NAACP and was an officer, in fact. As a matter of fact, they didn't have enough members out in the rural end of Madison County then to have a person for every office. So she held like 2 offices or something. But we couldn't tell anybody that she belonged to the NAACP because it affected her employment. The other thing we couldn't tell anybody, that has nothing to do with this, but we grew up on a highway, and if your cattle got out and somebody hit it and it was a wreck, you were in deep trouble. So we couldn't tell anybody that my mom belonged to the NAACP, and we couldn't tell anybody whose cow that was. So those are just 2 basic things that we grew up knowing. I came to Tougaloo, as I was saying, as I was growing up in Madison County, prior to, as you suggested, Ray, prior to the Freedom Rides, there were a lot of brave people doing a lot of things in a very covert kind of way. And followed, my father was following Medgar Evers, wherever Medgar Evers and Aaron Henry said to go. And there were people all over the state of Mississippi doing that. And as I've grown and moved around, I worked regionally for a number of years now. Actually worked at the Voter Education Project for a while, and at the Southern Regional Council in Atlanta, and moved about. You learn that all of these people, all of these unknown heroes, and many times sheroes, were in these communities and were community leaders and were trying to register people to vote, engaging in boycotts, doing a lot of things that put them in deep danger. Some people were like C.O. Chen's family, a little bit farther down the road. I mean, they were ready to go to battle in many communities. And we had the Deacons for Defense and all of these people that we grew up learning about. At any rate, as you have suggested, however, the Freedom Rides brought to fore a lot of that fear and removed a lot of that fear, because you were, at the time, you all were young people, you were children, and one thing about, our community is you don't mess with the children. So coming through Mississippi did raise not only the level of courage that people needed to, they were already courageous, but it said to folks, you can't be quiet about this. These kids are out here, you got to follow them. Now, coming through in 1966, it was after the summer of 1964, but we were still trying to register people to vote. And Hollis would have a team of us from Tougaloo going across the country. When I mean going across the country, I mean across the fields. And we would see people sitting on the remember about 1967, 68, students from Tougaloo sitting in at the Crystal restaurant, the Crystal hamburger place, and getting arrested on Meadowbrook Drive. I remember going into McRae's, and while they couldn't keep us out then, and they told them they couldn't disallow people to try on clothing, we as young women would go in from Tougaloo, and when we realized what they were doing, we had great fun in it, because groups of people would follow us through the store as if we were going to steal something. So then we would just decide to go in the store and just split up and drive them crazy, and then buy nothing and leave. So we didn't have any money anyway, me and my race. So all of what you did